Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Britton's Hangout Hour number either 18 or 19. I think it's 19 because I think I did 18 yesterday. Anyway, I'm here today with Dr. Fantasy himself, Mr. Philip Chase, or Dr. Philip Chase. I'm sorry. If you'd like
Philip is fine, actually.
if you'd like to introduce yourself, that
Yes, I am Philip Chase, and I run a YouTube channel all about fantasy, and I'm putting out some books, my own trilogy this year, the Edan trilogy, and I am an English professor, so that's pretty much me.
yes. I guess I was interested in your channel because, I already kind of mentioned this, but I'm interested in people who take the fantasy genre as seriously as any other great works of literature.
Sure.
I do think there are some great fantasy novels out there that should be described as great literature. But, I know Beowulf and the Odyssey, and you could call those fantasy, or technically called, classics, but I don't know how all those work. So
Well, that's a great point. And the fact of the matter is, fantasy is the oldest mode of storytelling when you think about it that way. And it has a long and respectable history. And there's a reason why people tell fantasy stories of where the imagination leaps beyond the realm that we find ourselves in. And so make believe monsters and magic and whatnot. I personally feel that fantasy deserves critical exploration because it serves some very important functions. We tell stories for a lot of reasons, don't we? I mean, to be entertained, to find interesting things about faraway places and cultures, and to find ourselves to some degree, to experience catharsis. But I think fantasy has some advantages over maybe other kinds of storytelling in a way because it tells stories in a world that is removed from the normal, from the mundane, and that allows the imagination to soar. It gives us what people call psychic distance, where things take place in another realm where it might feel a little less raw, but nevertheless, things like war, affect our world. And these are things that are explored in fantasy, and it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for us to read about it there and then come back and see our own world perhaps in a slightly different light. So fantasy absolutely deserves critical exploration, deserves discussion, and it should be celebrated as a genre that has many, many great stories within it.
yeah, no, I agree. I think it's and I'm always interested in people who take the who have that kind of I don't know if scholarly is the right word, but I guess it's a good word I could use. Again, I like people who take fantasy seriously. I find that interesting. And that's why I was
Yeah.
interested in your channel. But
Yeah, it doesn't have to be scholarly necessarily. There are certain traditions that are carried on in an academic context that you don't necessarily see in a place like BookTube, where we tend to be less formal. We tend to celebrate books in a slightly different way, which is wonderful.
well, yeah, I didn't want to say scholarly because like
Yeah.
you're not really a dry channel for
I
what
hope not.
I don't know, have you ever
Yeah.
seen Greg Sadler before? Gregory Sadler?
That name rings a bell. I'm not sure though, but I think so. I think so.
Well, he's a philosophy professor I've watched, and I know
Yeah.
a
Okay.
mutual friend of ours, acquaintance of ours, is Jimmy from Fantasy Network. He talked to him on his channel.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. 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 That's why that name rings a bell. Yeah,
mhm.
because Jimmy had it over
uh,
on chatting with us.
so that's
Yes.
probably
Yes.
where
Yes.
you heard of him. I know you and Jimmy are good friends.
Yes.
Um,
I actually watched that episode. Yeah. So that's why that name is familiar. Yeah.
but yeah, he does like philosophy of like Middle Earth or Le Guin.
Yes.
I actually still need to read Le Guin. That's one I wanted to.
Oh, I love Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea
I
books.
wanted to get into her work for so long, and it just never I don't know, just never got around to it. But hopefully hopefully one day the wait will be worth it. I just because I'm a mood reader, So.
Yeah. Well, it's a series that is most definitely conducive to critical exploration. You will see a lot of great themes explored in Le Guin's Ursula books. They're slightly different from what I think a lot of modern fantasy readers expect now, where the emphasis seems in the more modern stories to be on characters. A lot of people will describe themselves as character-driven readers. Le Guin's stories, I think, are more theme-driven, although her characters, in my opinion, are wonderful too. But particularly in the earliest of those books, A Wizard of Ursula, it reads a bit like a folktale in a way.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard her.
Yeah.
I've heard some of her early stuff is really whimsical, and then like some of her later stuff is a bit more heady. Is that a good word for it? I don't know.
Can be, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, she's one I've always wanted to try because she's one of like the grand masters of the genre, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we owe her a lot for many things, and she was a pioneer in exploring how fantasy could be applied in new ways. She was a marvelous feminist in her own way, and she was one of the earliest, I think, in fantasy to make her world more racially diverse than we're accustomed to seeing in some of the older stories as well. So she was definitely exploring things at a time when not many others were.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've heard some of her work is about gender as well, like some of like gender dynamics and
there's
like
some of that in
cultural
Ursula.
incomprehensibility and stuff like that, which that intrigues me. So I'd like to get to that again. I'd like to get to Le Guin at some point. I'm kind of sad I haven't.
Well, there are so many great authors and stories out there that we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to catch up. So
I mean, I just finished the second book of the Gentleman Bastard sequence.
Nice,
yesterday, which I really enjoyed.
Red Seas Under Red Skies.
I will say I like Lies of Locke Lamora better, but I enjoyed. There were some people who were saying it was weaker than the first one. I'm like, yeah, that's pure rubbish. I think I thought the second one was really fun.
I actually love all three of the Gentleman Bastard books that are out. I did get a little impatient with Seas Under Red Skies in terms of how descriptive it got with Locke and Jean learning how to sail. I was like, okay, all right, I know all these terms are, they mean something, and I was just kind of like skipping over them. And I know that Scott Lynch probably did some serious research to figure out.
I thought it was funny, the running gag with the like sea superstitions. I thought that was like a good gag throughout the book. He's like, "Get the cats!" He's like, good stuff.
Bad luck. Yeah.
I have no idea if that's real or if there's any like real life thing. I know there's like I don't know how many movies you've watched, or I don't know if you've seen like The Lighthouse, but
yeah, I mean, I'm not a sailor myself. I'm a landlubber myself, but the stereotype that I have anyway about sailors is that they're a fairly superstitious lot, at least in the old days. So that's how they're portrayed often. So that I just sort of took that as a standard fare, I suppose.
It was funny. I was actually talking to Joanna yesterday, as of the recording of this, and we were talking about the differences between Lies of Locke Lamora and Red Sea Under Red Sky, and she was like, "Well, I thought there was like more going on in Red Sea Under Red Skies." I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting," because I actually thought like the plot in that was a bit more tighter, because in the first one it's like a competing narrative. There's the flashbacks and then there's the current day.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, he does a lot with the flashbacks, which I like. I enjoyed that going back into Locke's childhood and all of that. And, it's been quite a few years since I've read those three books, but I really do have a high regard for them. I do hope that Scott Lynch is able to continue. I know he's going to put out a novella or something
I've heard
relatively
that.
soon. Yeah.
I just need to read Republic of Thieves, though I've heard it's not as good as the other two, but I want to find out for myself. So,
I liked it. I liked it. I didn't think there was any serious drop in the quality of the writing myself. So
I just heard it
if I,
drags.
I think if you like the
More.
first two, you most likely will like the third.
Yeah, but all I've heard is it just kind of drags a little bit.
Okay.
Or I don't know,
Yeah.
but again, I like to see it for myself. I don't want to,
Exactly.
I find I find I can't bring myself to just take people's word for it. I have to. I mean, if I see like one of those like Walmart books, I'll probably not pick that up. But yeah, you put out a book yourself. We were just talking about a minute ago.
Uh-huh.
I feel awkward because I when I tend to talk with authors, I like to read their work first, and I haven't read your book yet, so I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. I don't. It's relatively recent. The Way of Edan, the first book in the trilogy, came out on March 21. So you haven't had very long to try to read it, even. So that's not a. Yeah.
But I am intrigued by it because it seems very much like a throwback in some ways.
Yeah. Well, people have described it as reminiscent of classical fantasy, whatever that means. So, I mean, we could probably sit here for an hour just talking about what classical fantasy is, I suppose. But I've had, interestingly to me, and I love the comparisons. I'm very honored by them. But people have compared it to Tolkien and to some of the more like '90s kind of writers like Tad Williams, that sort of thing, which is very 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 honored by those comparisons. But it's also very modern in some senses. I think most people would agree with that as well. That it tends to explore even the people that are clearly the baddies or the villains or whatever you want to call them. I try to get a little more nuanced with them than you might see in let's say, Lord of the Rings or something. I don't have a Dark Lord or something like that. I have very human characters who I hope are a little bit complex and have motives that people can understand at least, and maybe in some cases sympathize with parts of those characters' motivations, and even while seeing their overall actions as perhaps harmful. So, and the good guys make mistakes, and there's that, I suppose, and it does get a bit gory, much more descriptive than classical fantasy tends to just sort of skim over or even glorify the violence. I'm writing in a much more, I hope, honest way about violence, like you might see in some Grimdark, where it's described in a more visceral manner. So maybe more like Abercrombie or something like that. So
That's interesting. I did finish the First Law trilogy this year. Actually, last month I completed.
Oh, nice.
Last
Yeah, I
Arc
love
of
First
Kings.
Law. I think Abercrombie's brilliant. Yeah.
Definitely felt like a throwback to stuff like Robert E. Howard's Conan,
Uh-huh.
or like old Sword and Sorcery of that. Even though like I have a bit of a you could call it guilty pleasure, but a soft spot in my heart for Pulp. So I
Oh, you
really
do? Okay, good
I
for
really
you. Yeah.
enjoy Robert E. Howard. And there's a lot of fantasy that came from that.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
There's
Tremendous.
a lot of it that is not great, but I still find enjoyable. And then there's the actually pretty good stuff that's a lot better than you'd anticipate it being.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do enjoy like Robert E. Howard quite a bit. I love how he
Cool.
love how he immerses you into the scene of.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, he did it mostly with short stories, which I find is even more impressive. I don't know if you've read Howard or.
Not much. And it's been a long time since I looked at a Conan story, but it's something I do want to go back to and probably talk about on the channel when I do that. So maybe read the collected stories or something like that. We'll see. I'd like to I hope I'll be doing that YouTube channel for many years to come, and I'll have time to do most of the classics that I really want to do.
So, you talk about fantasy on your channel predominantly, of course.
Yep.
Dr. Fantasy is kind of the I would call it a running joke of sorts.
It is, yeah. It was not a name that I chose for myself.
Well, that's
it was
good.
bestowed. It was bestowed upon me. Yeah.
I guess I should ask, like, what are some of your favorite, like, fantasy things? I know you've mentioned Tolkien and
Tolkien is in my bloodstream. I mean, I read Tolkien when I was 12, 13, and that's really what got me going on fantasy. Although I had read Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain before that, and
I have a buddy
that's
who really
based on.
enjoys that.
It's fun, yeah. I mean, there was no YA category back when those books came out, but they would probably be considered more YA nowadays. But I enjoyed that as a kid a lot, and then Tolkien, and of course I read C.S. Lewis's Narnia and that sort of thing. But in terms of my current favorites, the Malazan series is definitely up there for me, and that includes both Steven Erikson and Ian Esselmon's series. So that's definitely, if I had to pick a number one of all time, it would be Malazan right now.
Yeah, no, I have friends who absolutely adore Malazan, and I have good friends who don't like it. It's sort of seems like a love it or hate it kind of series.
I suppose, it's a series that, to me, the thing about it is, if you're a big-time fantasy reader, you get used to certain narratives, you get used to certain tropes, and Malazan flies in the face of a lot of those. It tends to be subversive. It tends to be a little different from a lot of what you might describe as more standard fantasy. So it can feel odd to a veteran fantasy reader, even because it does the unexpected. Just as one example, a lot of times in fantasy we expect to have a protagonist, right? Or at least a group of people that we follow along, and they're the main characters, if not the heroes. And we're more or less rooting for those characters, and we expect most of them to succeed and that sort of thing. Malazan doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you. If you're reading Malazan and you're looking for that, you're going to be lost. So you just have to accept that Malazan does things a little differently. In fact, a lot of the things that Malazan does that feel different are actually things that you find in literature in general, but not as much in fantasy as a genre. So it defies expectations, and that can be frustrating, I think, if you're not prepared for that. And that might be one barrier for some readers, perhaps. But it is a series that, in my experience at least, for me personally, it was incredibly rewarding. The most rewarding experience with stories that I've ever had in my life. It was just a massive experience reading Malazan. It's just indescribable how transformative that series has been for me. So I'm definitely a huge fan.
Yeah, I sort of have this thing called convince me to read Malazan, because I have an odd thing. I tend to try and stick with like trilogies and standalones, and if like I read a longer series, it's if I'm really interested in what's going on, like Game of Thrones or well, they say Gentleman Bastard is going to be 7 books, but I know Lynch has had some problems in recent years.
Yes. Yeah. Fortunately, yeah. I don't know if he's going to finish a 7-book series, but if he puts out a book, I'll definitely read it.
Like, I know, like, Rothfuss has a trilogy, but he's also fantasy authors have had a bad habit of not finishing what they start.
Well, you have this famous 3, so they've kind of given the genre, I guess, that impression that. But it's really just 3 of them. It's George R.R. Martin with A Song of Ice and Fire, which is stuck at book 5 of 7, supposedly. And then there's, as you said, there's Patrick Rothfuss with the Kingkiller Chronicle, and he's stuck at book 2. He's supposed to be I don't think he's going to finish with 3 books, even if he does come out with a 3rd book. I don't see how he can, based on where we left off with the 2nd book. And then there's Scott Lynch, and they're all 3 immensely talented writers, but they're also, I think, all 3 of them not exactly planners. They're not exactly organized individuals. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying not to fall into the trap with the thing I'm working on right now. I already have like.
Yeah, what can you tell me about what you're working on? I'd love to hear about it.
Well, oh, well, I'm working on the first of a saga, you could say, of fantasy.
Okay. Nice fantasy. Okay.
Basically, my take on sort of my love letter to like old pulpier like I'm kind of going back a little
Nice.
bit. The setting is based on like colonial America because I was thinking, man, there's all these medieval ones and I don't really want to do, because I have this like little weird like contrarian part of my brain. It's like, oh, maybe this will do, and then that part of my brain just goes, no. So
It can be helpful as a writer, man.
But yeah. So I'm working on that. It's basically it's funny because I'm trying to figure some stuff out, because on the one hand, I want the books you could read them as like standalone, but at the same time, I want there to be like an underarching, like there's something going on. You know, I think funnily enough, Scott Lynch is kind of good at that. Like he both Liza Locklemore and Red Seas Under Red Skies. I think you could read them like by themselves, and you could enjoy them.
Yeah,
but there is
I
also
agree.
like a deeper thing going on. Like there's consequences from the previous. You know,
Right.
does that
Like you mean like Dresden Files?
a little bit? I haven't read the Dresden Files. That's another one I'd like to get to at some point. But there's like 20 of those.
Yeah,
But
there's gonna be 25 or something.
I've heard
of them.
I've
still
heard they're
going.
mostly like standalone. So I'm like, okay, that I think I could do that. You know, at some point.
I think they are at first, at least. I've only read the first 6, and that you could definitely read each of those as a standalone. But what the fans tell me is that the further you get in the series, the more connected it becomes. So it changes over the course of the series. But yeah, definitely, so far as I've gotten, they're more or less like standalones.
So is your trilogy like a full on story, or is it or is it like 3 different stories in the same world? Because
I would characterize it much more as one story.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just, yeah, the second book picks up right where the first one leaves off. And pretty much the same thing is true of the third. So they are one story. But I do try to give something. I mean, there are definitely loose threads as the first book ends and as the second book ends, but I try to give the reader a real sense of satisfaction and completion at the end of each book. So while it is definitely one story, at the same time, I do hope that the reader will feel like, yeah, this is a good place for this to end right now.
Okay. I know you said you had like the 3 planned and there was like a standalone, because I was watching a
Yeah, I actually have a standalone written as well that is set about 15 years after the end of the trilogy.
Yeah, because I saw, like, or maybe it was like a conversation, because, like, when I'm writing, I like listening to, like, conversations. Like, I'll listen to, like, you know, Dr. Fantasy, or I'll listen to, like, you know, Joanna's, you know, Why Read thing she's got on her channel.
Well, that's a great show. Yeah, it's a great show.
Or Jimmy, you know, because I like Jimmy's channel.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, but yeah, no, that's kind of what I'm working on. There's other things I'd like to do as well.
That's great. So you said it's like colonial Americas?
It's inspired by that, like Puritans, because I've always been like really fascinated by that period.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
It's like I really like Solomon Kane from Robert E. Howard, which actually inspired me to like go like, oh, this is an interesting direction. Like I could, not a lot of people are doing that.
Nice.
I know there's like flintlock fantasy out there. I need to get more into that.
There's some of that. I haven't read much of that myself. Have they read any of the like more classical authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne who write about the Puritans and that sort of thing?
I've read what's funny about like Hawthorne is that I like his short stories more than like his books.
Like the Scarlet Letter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Scarlet Letter's fine. It's just the language is really hard to get into.
It's a little bit archaic for a modern person.
Even like for that time. So.
Yeah. But it's interesting, his portrayal of the Puritans. I was just thinking of that as you were talking, too.
Mm-hmm.
So, are we talking 17th century then? Like
something, yeah.
Early 1600s? Or...
It's funny, I've given it to some people who I'm friends with to, like, read it, and they're like, why are you using... Didn't you say this is, like, set during this time? Because I'm not, like, using a lot of, like, archaic language, and I'm like... I'll go back, because I'm just writing the first draft just to get it down, and then I'll go back and, maybe mess with it. Yeah.
That is tricky if you're trying to evoke that period. How far do you go in duplicating the language of the people of that time? You don't want to go too far, because people today won't be able to read it, right?
Yeah, they're going to be like, what? And, I was like, because I realized, I'm like, you don't really need to be... it's fantasy, like you can do whatever you want with it. Though I do want to,
right.
At the same time, though, I want to evoke the feeling of that period, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a tricky business to make it accessible, but also evoke the feeling that you're in a different time or maybe even a different world. So yeah, that's hard to do. Look, we talked about Guin earlier. She wrote a wonderful essay on that topic called "From Elfland to Poughkeepsie."
I've heard of this. I've never read it though.
Yeah, it's a short essay. You can find it online. But basically, the premise is in the prose matters, and that it in fact, in some ways, the prose is the story, and fantasy that is supposedly not in our world, that is in a different world, needs to evoke that somehow, and it's through the language that it does that. So, I don't want to write a book that supposedly has some medieval inspired setting, but people sound like they're in modern New Jersey or something, right? I mean, that would be kind of ridiculous. So you have to be conscious of that. And it is possible to go too far, to get too archaic or too stylized, and that doesn't work. But you want to be at least giving your reader the impression that this is not our world and helping the reader to be immersed in this other world through that language.
Yeah, I've heard people mention it. But yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I suppose why I like fantasy is because you get to see another world that's not quite ours, but they struggle with the same stuff that we do.
Exactly. It's a mirror of our world, but with dragons and magic and cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, no, it's fun because I'm also inspired by like Native American stuff, so I'm looking at like Native American mythology and like monsters and stuff that they have, because I'm like, ooh, yeah, fun to mess with.
Yeah, well, that would blend well with definitely with the Puritan style setting, I think, right? Yeah.
I'll have to finish it before I talk too much about it, but that's basically the gist of it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I wish you a lot of luck and a lot of fulfillment with that. It's a lot of fun to write, and you're doing the right thing by writing. A lot of people think that they're supposed to wait until they're brilliant at writing, but you don't get to be brilliant without practicing first. Yeah. So you've got to write if you want to write. I mean, it sounds kind of obvious when you say it, but so many people think that they have to wait until they're really, really good at it. But you only get good at it by doing it.
Yeah, I don't want to wait till like I'm in like my 40s and they go, crap, I could have been doing all this other stuff,
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, you also cover manga on your channel, which is
I just started that. Yeah, I've
it's
been doing a little bit of manga with Murphy Napier. Yeah.
it's funny. It's kind of like a trend I've noticed on like BookTube in general. There's like a lot of manga readers. Um,
Yeah, I didn't know much at all about manga until I talked to Murphy, and then she sort of talked me into trying Vinland Saga, which I really enjoyed. I didn't realize that it was a medium with such great storytelling. And then we just finished up Vagabond. I don't know if you've read any manga yourself, but um,
I've read the first volume of Vagabond, but I want to read it again because I kind of got thrown off because it's not like American comics where it's left to right; it's right to left.
it's a bit of an adjustment. Yeah.
Um, I have read Naoki Urasawa's stuff, Monster.
I'm just starting that now. Just starting that.
Oh,
Yeah.
are you? It's amazing. I love that series. Also read
Cool.
Pluto, which is much shorter. Also very good.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Science
Yeah.
fiction though. I'm more of an American comics fan, but I have read some manga. So,
Cool. Yeah, I grew up on American comics back in the late '70s through the mid '80s. So I'm in the what is that? Is that the Bronze Age? I don't know. I forget what age that is, and they've got these categories for Golden Age of comics, Silver, and Bronze, or whatever. But anyway, yeah, it was the thing that first fed my imagination was American comics. I was a huge X-Men fan and Spider-Man fan.
love Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Him and Batman are tied as my favorite superhero. I just recently saw Across the Spider-Verse, which was awesome.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen it myself. My daughter saw it and said she loved it, but I haven't seen it yet. But I loved Spider-Man as a kid. I have tons of old Spider-Man comics.
Yeah, no, I cover American comics on my channel because, like, I find like, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I think people should go read. I'm actually rereading Saga right now because I've been meaning to catch up on it forever. Now I am.
Cool.
I think you would like Saga. It's very good. I don't know if you've like lost interest in American comics or stuff since you're dove into
Well,
fantasy
it's
now.
been a while. I have to confess, I haven't kept up since the mid '80s. So yeah, it's been a little while. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
But interestingly, a lot of the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe were based on stories that were going on during the time I was collecting.
Oh,
So
wow.
those films were very easy for me to watch because I recognized a lot of the plots and a lot of the characters and stuff. So yeah.
But yes, you enjoy Tolkien quite a bit. I
Tolkien was my favorite until Malazan, and it still is very much beloved.
I enjoy Tolkien as well, though there's like a part of me that's sort of... I actually want to reread The Lord of the Rings again. I want to reread it at some point to see if it like holds up still. But I don't know. I feel like I've sort of moved on at a sense. I don't know. That might. I know that might shock a few people, but
No, I think a lot of people have moved on. It is possible to move on and still appreciate what something brought to the genre. And not being obsessed with one series. I think is probably a good thing, and exploring. And I myself was probably a little bit too focused on Tolkien when I was young, and didn't branch out until I was a little bit older. So, I wouldn't call those wasted years, but, I regret a little bit that I didn't try to branch out a little more in fantasy earlier, but I've been making up for lost time in the last 20 years or so. So.
I think Tolkien's a lot of way is often a way people get into fantasy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he opens the door for a lot of people. Or used to. I don't know. I think today it's more likely to hear people say it was like Brandon Sanderson or something,
Yeah,
who brought in fantasy.
I've been wary of getting into Sanderson because I don't know. Well, he does like trilogies mostly, which I can read them. I can read those, and I tend to stick with trilogies, but I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Mistborn sounds interesting though. But
Yeah, I've only read the original Mistborn trilogy myself and the first three Stormlight Archive books. So I'm not a huge Sanderson Cosmere aficionado or anything like that,
did you like them?
but he's done a lot for the genre, and I figured if I'm a fantasy fan, I probably should check out Sanderson some. So
Yeah, no, it's yeah, no, I mean, I guess I like prefer stuff like First Law or Gentlemen Bastards or I
yeah,
don't know, something that's like grittier, I guess. I don't know.
have you like First Law and Gentleman? Have you read Mark Lawrence's books yet?
I have not, but I am friends with him on my Facebook because we're in similar groups. And
Okay.
I had an interesting chat with him once. I think he was mildly intoxicated when we were talking, so that was.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Like someday I'd like to check it out, or check him out. I've heard like his new book is very good.
Yeah, well, if you like his grittiest books are definitely his first trilogy, The Broken Empire. That's his only Grimdark trilogy. The rest, I would say, are definitely not Grimdark, but they're very funny in places. Like you seem to like those. Joe Abercrombie and Scott Lynch are both, in my opinion, very witty, and Mark Lawrence is similar in a way, and with the wit. So he's a funny writer, but also very talented. All three of them are really. So I kind of think of them as writers that you're likely to like if you like one of them. You probably would like the other two, would be my guess in most cases. I love Lawrence's writing. I love Abercrombie and Lynch. So yeah, I definitely am a fan of all three.
But I guess you could say like more like literary. Like I like.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to explain my taste of fantasy because it's kind of weird. I like fantasy that kind of breaks the mold, I guess, in some ways. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
It's hard
Yeah.
to describe. I don't know how to.
Well, then I think Lawrence might be a very interesting read for you because he tends to disregard genre boundaries, and you'll find science fiction often a big element in his so-called fantasy. So, especially in the recent one, The Book That Wouldn't Burn. But I've read three of his other trilogies myself: The Broken Empire, Red Queen's War, and the Book of the Ancestor. And in each of them, there's a heavy science fiction element. So if you like somebody who just disregards the rules and does some interesting things, he also does some really cool things like Scott Lynch with chronology. Like he'll have a whole parallel threads going on with one being several years or 20 years or whatever before another, and they actually feed each other in some really interesting ways. So he does a lot of cool things with chronology as well. So you might actually really enjoy his writing.
Like, have you read like Neil Gaiman?
I have. I love Neil Gaiman's.
I was gonna say I like Neil Gaiman quite a bit. American Gods is my favorite of his.
I also American Gods is my favorite Neil Gaiman book so far. Yeah.
Oh wow. I was talking with a friend of mine about it the other day because he was talking about he likes he was talking about like he liked Stardust more, which I've never actually read, but
and made a film about it.
Yeah, they did make a movie. I haven't seen it, but I guess I'm really intrigued by American Gods because he combines like mundane life with this like fantastical element.
Absolutely.
And also, I love Norse mythology, so I'm all about that. I still need.
Same here. Yeah, Norse mythology is a big part of my writing. So yeah.
I've heard that, which I'm like, I'll definitely pick it up then, because.
Cool. Yeah. No. I mean, my background is I'm a medievalist, and I've studied Old English and Old Norse, so that's definitely a huge part of what I do.
Or do you have like poetry in your book?
Yeah. Well, there are some poems in there. They're very much based on Old English poetry as well. Yeah. But they're not. I mean, they're to me. they're not just a side thing. They're actually thematically linked with the rest of the story.
Well, I mean,
So
I'm sure, every author has to, I I always feel pressure when people are like, "Oh, these authors, there's not a word in there that wasn't meant to be there." And I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, cause I'm writing, I'm like, I'm just getting through this, man. I don't know. I'm just doing my best. Don't say
I'm
that.
sure that everyone has a word here and there that they could
You're putting the
delete.
pressure on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I had a fun time using Old English poetry as an inspiration for a bardic character in the trilogy. I mean, if people skim the poems, I am not at all offended, but I like them, and I do think that there are some interesting thematic echoes in the poems because there's in a lot of stories, like Beowulf, for example, there are stories within the story. And these stories within the story often provide some insight into the bigger story. And so that's something if you like that sort of thing, you can pay attention to it. If you don't, you can skim it.
Fair enough. I suppose I suppose I'll get there when I
Yeah.
eventually read it at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like what like is there? So Malazan is you're like that like that's like peak fantasy for you.
I like it. I think Malazan is cool because it shows a lot of interesting things that you can do with the genre that um, probably people are going to start to do more and more now. But Malazan was in many ways a pioneer. So
Mm.
that makes me really interested. Plus, it's just so vast and so it's something you can really get immersed in. And I feel very connected to the characters. I feel like there's a really fantastic thematic exploration, and like I've never seen any uh, exploration of themes like compassion as deep and as interesting and beautiful as what Malazan does, and it's a very emotional journey too when you get to the end. So that's
Yeah, I
all
mean,
those things. Go ahead.
just well, I mean, I'm reading Best Served Cold right now from
Oh, nice.
Abercrombie.
Yeah.
I was gonna take a break from Abercrombie after finishing Last Argument of Kings because I
Okay.
guess you could say that book kind of slapped me in the face, just
Yeah.
because I wasn't because he's called Grimdark, so I'm like, okay, I'm not expecting a full on happy ending, a la Lord of the Rings. Though I do think it's a little more
Right.
nuanced than that, but that's beyond the point.
Yeah, yeah. I think the ending is brilliant, but it's not a happy ending. That's for sure.
No, no, it's not. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take a break. And they're like, hey, they're gonna make a Best Served Cold movie, and I was just like, okay, fine.
I'm pretty excited about that myself.
I'll
Yeah.
go read it. I'll read it, and I'm enjoying it though. It's
Good.
interesting because I actually like the side characters more than like the main one
Uh
so
huh.
far.
They're pretty interesting crew there. Yeah.
Um, it's kind of his take on the motley crew of like misfits, except a lot of them are awful.
Yeah, yeah, and it's of course the revenge story as well. But yeah, it's brilliant. I love everything Abercrombie has written in the First Law world, but my favorite is definitely the Age of Madness trilogy, which is the last thing you should read if you're reading everything in order, which I would recommend. But it is to me the best of Abercrombie.
I do hope to get to all of them at some point, but after Best Served Cold, I'm probably gonna take a break for a little bit because
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Not that like I'm like I like dark stuff, but it's I'm like okay, eh, if I like read one author for too long, I'll get burned out.
Yeah, I like to mix things up myself too. I'll go from one series to another.
Yeah, like one I really want to read is the Babel, isn't it? I have the first book in my very professional looking pile over there.
That's a nice pile. Are you saying the Books of Babel by Josiah
Yeah,
Bancroft?
yeah. Hold on, I'll go grab it. It's because I've wanted to read it for a while, So I like the concept of it. This one.
So you've got Senlin Ascends.
Yes. I'm really intrigued by the concept of it.
I'm actually reading the third book in that series right now.
Oh yeah, is it good?
Yeah, I'm not done with it, so I can't give you my full assessment, but I really loved the first two books, the Senlin Ascends and Arm of the Sphinx. And right now I'm in the Hod King, about, I guess 3/4 of the way through, maybe more. And there were parts of it that I'll be honest, that were difficult for me to read, but not because Josiah Bancroft is a bad writer. He's actually a really great writer, but just because thematically there were things in there that were hard to read about. It's
like
a
emotionally
in some
or just
emotionally
tough read,
in some
or?
ways it's a very interesting critique of society, particularly of patriarchy, and of a brutal social system where a lot of people get hurt. I guess it could be taken as a good sign where you make me care enough about a character that when bad things happen to that character, it hurts, right? So it's been a harder thing for me to read the third book than the first two. The first two were I wouldn't call them fun, but they were enjoyable reads. I can't say the third has been entirely enjoyable, but it's compelling. It's interesting writing. So
Yeah, I know. I watch Alan of Alexandria.
Yes, he loves the series. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's another one I'd like to have on here at some point, but he's kind of hard to reach sometimes.
He can be.
Yeah. I have him on Discord, and I sent him a message the other day, just like, hello, how's it going? And he just sent a curt hello.
He's a busy fellow.
I know he's a busy guy, but I was just kind of like, oh well, okay.
No. He's a wonderful person, like Jimmy and Joanna, all wonderful people. But yeah, Alan is a very busy guy. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of tracking down, because I'm back on BookTube again. So I guess I'm just like tracking down all the like booktubers I can talk to, because I don't
nice.
I have a lot of free time right now, so fun. But yeah, no, it's fun stuff. I enjoy it.
Good. Yeah.
But yeah, what were we gonna say?
I was just gonna ask about your channel, because it's new to me. How long have you been doing it, and what types of things do you like to do on your YouTube channel?
Oh well, I cover books on there. Well, it's a funny story, because I did do like a kind of BookTube, comics, movies, whatever the hell I want kind of stuff, because I like to defy category, because I don't want to, I want to attract everybody. But I kind of stopped because I'm not really good at expressing myself on camera. I'm better at writing.
It is hard, yeah.
Though some friends of mine are like, why don't you just do it? You got a channel. You're good at you have these opinions. You go do it. And I'm like,
sure.
I'm like, all right, I don't see why. So the trick is, I got a bunch of bullet points to help me out when I'm recording him. Yeah, I just cover genres I like: fantasy, sci-fi, horror, crime. Covered a western the other day. I'm actually covering a crime novel tomorrow. But yeah, I've covered fantasy I've covered the First Law trilogy on my channel. Though
Nice.
I'm not entirely satisfied with my Last Argument of Kings one, but whatever. I'm critical of myself, so you might enjoy it, and it's funnily enough. I guess I should say, predictably enough, it's probably one of the more popular ones on my channel.
Oh, okay, cool.
People are like, "Hey, good video, man." I'm like, "Oh, thank you."
Yeah, it feels great when people reach out and let you know that they enjoyed your video. It's a really neat feeling.
Yeah, I did it on my phone, so it's like, for a little bit because my old computer wasn't working. Then I got my new
Yep.
ones, and I just do it on that.
I actually use my phone to film, so I don't.
There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just it's more convenient, when you have the computer.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, some people buy fancy equipment and all that, but I have never done that.
No, I think it's funny because you've seen like Brian Lee Durfee's stuff, right? Like, have you seen?
Yeah,
his
yeah,
stuff?
I've seen some of his
I
videos.
like how he just like records like on his phone, and he's just like, oh hey, here's my.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I've talked with him a few times. He's a very nice man.
Yeah, he seems great, and I haven't read his books yet, but I definitely want to.
Yeah, I wanted to try out his like, because it's again trilogy, so I'm like, all right, I'll check that out. Yeah, but they're big, so I'm like, because
They do look big, but he and I have something in common, which is that I think there's a holy war in his trilogy as well, and that's at the center of what's going on in my trilogy too. So.
Oh, it's funny. I was talking with my mom the other day about what I read. She's like, "Oh, you're getting pretty in there, huh?" So it's like, book I was reading was like 300 pages maybe. Now, that's short to me. Like I can read that just fine.
Short for fantasy, yeah.
Yeah. Or, I don't know if it. Well, no, it wasn't. I don't think it was a fantasy, but it was just like it was like 300. I'm like, all right, Now, if it's something like I'm reading, Best Served Cold, that's more like. That's more of like if it's like 600s, 700s, 800, that's long for me. Like that's a bit longer, but
Yeah.
But if
that's
it's
respectable.
good, then I don't like it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how this stuff works.
Yeah. So with your own books, how long do you think they're going to be?
It's funny. I'm at 139 pages Yep, 139 pages right now.
As a Word document, or
I have it as I'm on Google Docs doing it, and then I'll transfer it.
Similar then, yeah. So the real measure is going to be your word count.
Yeah, no. I had like 33,000 last I checked.
You're on your way.
So it's like because I didn't want it to be like a big chunker, because the story I'm telling right now is kind of like it's about if you don't mind, I'll just give like a short synopsis if that's okay.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So basically, my main character is a bit more of a rougher kind of guy. He's basically like a PI nowadays, except he's more
cool.
He's more it's a bit more rough and tumble than like a PI would probably be. He gets caught up in a situation where he could get into a lot of trouble because he's in jail at the very beginning of the story. And,
nice.
And all the acquaintance of his basically says, "Hey, I can help you out from this if you help me with this situation that's going on in this town." So basically, he goes to this town to figure out what's going on. So it's that's
so when we first meet your protagonist, he's in jail.
Yep. Though I started with like a prologue because it starts like I like. It's called like In Medias Res or something. You know, it starts in the middle of something, then But yeah.
Cool. Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically it. Because I wanted it to, I didn't want it to be super complicated, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great idea to start in medias res, the blade itself, for example. That opener is just bang, you're right in the middle of the action. Great stuff.
Yeah, no, I do plan on doing a second one, which will probably be more of like a traditional adventure. So I'm very much looking forward to that, because I do love the group of people going on an adventure, because we all have the tropes we like,
Absolutely, tropes exist for a good reason. They're, I don't think of trope as a bad word necessarily.
No, I don't either.
They're tools that are very useful in storytelling, and they can be like any other tool. They can be used well, or they can be used badly. So yeah.
Like, there's the ones I like, there's the ones I don't really care for, and I like another fantasy trope I like is like the group of adventurers going on a little,
Yeah, the quest group. The quest
group,
yeah.
yes. It's
Do you play any role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh yeah, I've played some. I'm actually in a Monday game and a Saturday one, so that's fun.
Sweet.
But
yeah, that's another thing I did when I was in high school. I haven't done since high school, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no. I enjoy the role playing aspect more than like combat, because there's more like rules that come with it. Nothing against like who's like the DM or whatever. It's just kind of I just get kind of bored with it.
Yeah. Do you do it online, or do you get together with your friends?
Sadly, I mostly do it online because
Uh-huh.
But I have done it in person back in high school. Though I got caught up with other stuff, and the character I had, he got stuck in the dream realm, and we never.
Oh no!
We never,
Is he still there?
Yeah, we never wrapped that part up. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, he's still there.
Oh wow! He's stuck in that limbo all these years. Wow.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that was the only way we could do it back when I was in high school. Was in person. So,
I know the internet is such a beautiful thing sometimes.
Yeah, I mean it's another great tool that can be used for good and ill, isn't it?
Yes, it's it's like tropes. Never thought I'd say that, but
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, there's like something freeing about like when I started writing. You just you can do whatever you want when it comes to fantasy. Or that's how I think now.
Sure.
Now I mean the world I'm making is not. Now I'm not gonna put like trains in it or anything like that. Or I do have like
right.
There are stuff I want to like. There's flintlock guns in my world because I'm like why not, right? Because
absolutely, yeah.
Though there is a lot of.
No, it's an interesting period too, because I don't know if you want to do anything with that, but of course the Salem witch trials are very famous.
Oh
and
yeah.
So it would make sense to have kind of a supernatural element in there, I suppose. I assume since it's fantasy, there's something magical in there, right?
Yes, there is. The thing in the town is definitely supernatural.
Cool.
So,
yeah.
I actually recently was writing about it. So again, I don't want to spoil things.
Nice. Yeah, don't give away too much. But it sounds intriguing. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, no, it's and plus like some of it, I read Perdido Street Station from China Mieville last year.
Oh, interesting.
Which that set fire to me. I'm like, oh man. So I might have ripped off some stuff from that a little bit, just a little bit. But I'm trying to do like my own thing with that. It's not a Steam world though.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever read that, but I think it's a.
I have Perdido Street Station ready to read this year, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh, I think it's an incredible novel. I thought.
And it's part of a trilogy or something. Is that right?
Yeah, but they're all standalone stories.
Okay.
Good stuff. I actually read the trilogy last year, so that was kind of my big thing I was reading.
Cool.
This year, big thing I guess was First Law. Probably something else I'm forgetting. Like who are some other like fantasy authors you've enjoyed as well? That you've covered.
Okay. So we mentioned Tolkien. We mentioned the Malazans. That's Erickson and Esselmont. We mentioned Le Guin. Another one that I've enjoyed and think is a really breath of fresh air in many ways is N.K. Jemisin with the Broken Earth trilogy.
Yeah, I have her. I have her first Broken Earth book. I haven't read it yet. I want to though.
The 5th season. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, that's something very different. She takes some very bold risks in there that you won't realize until the end how they pay off. But and famously, this is not a spoiler, but it's an interesting aspect. She uses the second person, so you. right? Which is unusual, and it doesn't completely make sense until much later. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I found that to be a very compelling series. I mentioned Mark Lawrence. I mentioned Joe Abercrombie, Scott Lynch. George R. R. Martin has been a huge influence, and I enjoyed the Song of Ice and Fire series immensely. Who else? Neil Gaiman was another of my favorites. We talked about him already, and particularly American Gods. But I also love The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I
That's a
think it's
good
a
one.
beautiful.
I enjoy Coraline quite a bit.
Uh huh.
Then again, I
Yeah.
grew up reading it, so I might have some bias there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's the cool thing about Neil Gaiman is he does have a range there. I think where some of his stuff can be read by not little kids, a little too creepy for that, but by older kids. I think is the age group.
Yeah, I mean, one I'd like to read at some point is the Graveyard book. I have it over there. I just
Yep.
haven't read it yet. Or like
I
Anansi
haven't read it
Boys.
either. My daughter has read it and really likes it a lot.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned in like something you had like a grown daughter, and I was like, how old is this man? I
Yeah,
thought you were
yeah,
like in your early mid 40s at least.
yeah. No, I'm actually in my 50s.
Oh, you look.
Yeah.
Would it be like a stealth insult if I said you look very good for in your 50s? Or is that like a compliment?
Well, I'll take it as a compliment.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Because I don't mean it as a. Because I know there's some I'm like, oh, you look good for your age, and they're like,
It look good for an old fuddy duddy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, yeah, no, but yeah, no, there's a lot of other fantasy I'd like to get to.
Yeah. Oh, so many. Oh my goodness, Robin Hobb, Realm of the Elderlings.
Yeah, it's funny
That's
about Robin Hobb is like I see her mentioned a lot, and I see some of her
yeah.
covers because I'm a real like cover guy. So like I'll look at her covers and I'm like, this looks like yeah. But I've heard people like her, and I'll try her out someday. I will. But
You know what I would recommend
what?
if they cost a little bit more, but they're much nicer, is if you can get the British covers
Oh,
rather than the American ones, because they're a lot classier looking. The American covers are kind of cheesy, to be
no, it's
honest.
like
So, yeah, I would recommend the British versions if you can get them. But the books are tremendous. I mean, they're again, the nice thing about it is okay, it's a 16 book series, but it's broken up into various trilogies and one tetralogy. So you can take it one trilogy at a time. You don't,
mhm.
and there that's the fine way to do it. So, you can try the Farseer trilogy, and if you like it, you can move on.
I suppose what's fun about fantasy now is that there's like a lot more like I'd say diversity in it, which
oh yeah, yeah.
like there's like I have I read Black Leopard Red Wolf a few years ago and that blew me
Oh
away.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
cool.
I don't know if you've read it, but
Not yet. It's another one that's on my radar though, for
but
sure.
yeah, that's one I'd really be interested in you checking out if I like be like, oh look,
Yeah.
he finally got there. I'd like to see what he's because I really think that was a book I was like. It's one of those books.
Cool.
You have those books you don't really shut up about, and Black Leopard, Red Wolf is one of those for me. I'm always telling
Nice,
people, go
nice.
read it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm interested in it for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
or American Gods. First Law to a lesser extent, though it's not so much because like a bunch of other people have read the First Law. It's very popular.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've covered most of First Law on my channel, and I've also covered American Gods, and that is one of my least watched videos.
I have to watch that
Yeah,
because like
I've
American
it's
Gods
a
is another
brief
one.
one.
American Gods is another one that's kind of a take it or leave it kind of book. I love it, but I know there's some people who don't like it, and I mean I can
I'll
see
tell you
why.
one thing about it.
It is a meandering book, I'll admit, but I
It
like
is. I
it
mean,
because of that. But it's
it's
so
almost like it doesn't know what it is. It's a fantasy, but it's also got all this mythology. It's a mystery. It's a road trip novel. It's so many things rolled into one.
but I like
But
that, even though like if it were like other books, I would complain about it. But it's so like mysterious and weird and you want to see more. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. It works for me. It definitely works for me.
Yeah, it's for a particular, like, I know people like Neverwhere. I haven't read that. Oh, hello, kitty. Come here. There you go.
Yeah, I've been seeing that little kitty cat's tail poke up every once in a
Yeah.
while.
um, yeah. No, I'm always looking for, like, I'm always looking for interesting like, I have Kings of the Wild over here. I'd like to read.
Nice.
I've heard it's a bit more like standard, but I don't mind. If you have like hello there.
Yeah.
um, uh, like, I mean, the thing is, like, I don't mind, like, more standard fantasy as long as it's, like, done well.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
Or
key. I
standard,
mean,
if you want to call it that.
that's the thing. I want it to be done well, whatever it is.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Like, I mean, First Law deals with a lot of familiar stuff, but it's
but he does some very unexpected things, I
exactly,
think, at
yeah.
the same time. And some of it is very deliberately subversive. So I like it. I think he does enough that makes it fresh and interesting for sure.
No.
Without spoilers, we could mention particulars, but we don't want to give any spoilers here. But yeah, and he's just a funny writer. I mean, do you know any writer who's as funny as Abercrombie? He's hysterical.
Oh man, Hunter S.
Plus,
Thompson maybe.
yeah, maybe. But it's such a bleak world too. But because of his humor, it's
Yeah,
bearable.
the humor and emotion is what makes it work for me. Because if it were just like grim, yeah, it's really dark, it wouldn't work. I don't think so.
No, it would be all edgy and
just
boring.
I would get annoyed pretty quickly and be like, yeah, screw this. This is dumb.
Yep.
At least me. I mean, I like dark stuff, but I don't like, I don't like it when it's a cartoon. That's a good way. That's probably a good way to put it. But yeah.
So cool, yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's any others that we should definitely mention, but I think we covered the majority of a lot of my favorites anyway. If you like quirky, kind of like The Ocean at the End of the Lane type things, and have you tried Susanna Clarke yet?
I want to. I do want to read. I am planning on reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
Okay, that's the big one. Yeah.
I might read Piranesi this year. Not sure yet.
Okay. They're very different books, so if you don't like one, you might still like the other. But Piranesi is definitely kind of at the same kind of dreamlike vibe that you get from The Ocean at the End of the Lane. It's a very interesting book.
Yeah, I mean,
very quirky.
But yeah, no, I'm there's some like weirder ones I want to read next year. Like, I know Gorman Gast is sort of is sort of a big one. Which I was going to ask this. Have you read any of the I don't want to call it anti-Tolkienist stuff because that sounds like, I don't know. That might sound a little ridiculous.
Michael Moorcock's Elric books,
yeah,
and that sort of.
Yeah, have you read like China Mieville to a lesser extent, or Michael Moorcock, or people who are trying to like step away from like that Tolkien-esque stuff?
Yeah, I'm trying to get into that a little more. Recently read, I don't know, I don't think Gemmell was so much like that, but he definitely is a big, important influence for what people call Grimdark now. So I did recently read Legend by David Gemmell, which was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun reading Legend. In some ways, in a couple of minor ways, it has not aged well, but mostly it's a really fun read. So if you haven't tried Gemmell before, I would highly recommend Legend as a starting point, at least. And then if you like it, continue with the Draenei books. Yeah, he's one that I sort of started getting into. I do want to eventually cover Moorcock on the channel, and definitely I've got, probably even before that, I will try, like I said, I do have and will read this year, I hope, with the Perdido Street Station, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say I like fantasy that really that tests my view of what it is, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I like fantasy
Yeah.
that challenges the mold, like I said earlier, and Perdido Street Station does that. It's
You probably will like Piranesi then, I suspect.
yeah, no, I do want to try. I might do Piranesi this year, but Jonathan Strange, Miss Norrell definitely next year because
I love Jonathan Strange, Mr. Neural too. So I mean, that's I wouldn't call that by any means traditional either. It's very different though from Piranesi, and it's kind of like very Jane Austen-y in a way. It's like the Napoleonic era, and she really gets that voice. She nails that voice really well. So
yes, I've
that's
heard
one
it's
thing.
very Dickens-esque, which I love Charles Dickens, so I'm
Yeah, I'd say even slightly older than Dickens, but yeah.
would you say Dickens had some fantasy works in his? Like, would you say the Christmas
Dickens.
Carol is? Would you say A Christmas Carol is fantasy?
You know what? You could argue it is because it has fantastic supernatural elements in it, doesn't it? With the ghosts of Christmas past and present and future and all that. So yeah, if you have a very liberal definition of fantasy, the 19th century is, if you want to be even more strict about how you define fantasy as a genre, you could say it begins in the 19th century with authors like George MacDonald and William Morris, and that's more self-conscious fantasy, like we would recognize. But yeah,
I mean, I would say like fantasy, like Shakespeare, even or
there are a few plays of Shakespeare's, like Macbeth or Midsummer Night's Dream or The Tempest, that definitely have massive fantasy elements.
or like I said earlier, the Odyssey or the Iliad or even Beowulf.
Absolutely. It's the oldest form of storytelling if you look at it from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess I'll lead to the last thing I'd like to talk about with you today, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
If I can keep
Absolutely.
you a little longer. Not too much longer, of course, but you are a professor. You
I am. Yeah.
You're an English professor. Do you cover English or do you cover fantasy in your classes or not?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I actually started a course at my college called Fantasy Novels and taught it for many years. And I loved that course, and the students were wonderful, and the course used to run very well. And then they made some in my opinion, unfortunate decisions at the state level and even at the local level that are reflective of some national trends. And it's unfortunate, in my opinion. It's something that is fairly upsetting to me, is that the humanities in general have been under attack in higher education. There's a de-emphasis on things like literature and history and philosophy and whatnot.
Well, I mean, I ask some leading into another kind of question, but
Sure.
because
Yeah.
I find your channel interesting because you take fantasy as seriously as other great works of literature, something like like why do you think fantasy, like, except like there are exceptions of course, but why do you think fantasy is not taken as seriously? I know there's sort of that genre versus literature debate. I mean, I've kind of lost interest in that, but that sort of dichotomy still kind of interests me at the same time.
Yeah, and it still exists, and you even see some writers, unfortunately, who are, some of them are great writers, but they have made this effort to distance themselves from genre fiction. Writers like Salman Rushdie, for example, who definitely uses the fantastic in his writing, but prefers to say, well, no, I do, magic realism, not fantasy, right?
Yeah, that term bothers me a little bit, but
It does bother me too. I think it's a bit petty, honestly, to make these distinctions, but he wants to be taken seriously as an author, and I get that. And he is a great author.
I still need to read.
So, and there are definitely others as well. And you see a similar thing with what's her name, the author of the Handmaid's Tale.
Atwood.
Atwood. She's made very similar statements about no. I don't write science fiction. I write whatever, So
Yeah, no,
they don't want to be branded with the genre fiction stigma. So I think that's unfortunate, and that is indicative of a snobbery that still exists and is unfortunate because okay, you can point to any kind of category of literature and find terrible, schlocky, awful writing. There's no doubt about it. And you can find in any genre some truly gorgeous, breathtaking, transformative stories.
I agree.
So I think it's ridiculous in a way to dismiss an entire genre as bad writing. It's not just ridiculous; it's wrong, and
Yeah, no,
you're
I agree.
missing a lot of great stories when you do that.
No,
So
I agree. It's funny too because it's like a lot of the like people who we describe as like great authors now, like they were kind of not taken seriously in their time. I mean, Shakespeare
oh yeah,
was
like Tolkien, for example.
there's a really famous Tolkien blast that I remember reading. Some like big literary critic at the time. It's called like Elves and Dwarves or something. I can't remember. Or it's like those damn elves or something. And it was real. It's pretty ridiculous, but fun to read.
I
though.
feel like people who are doing that are probably not fantasy readers, and
yeah.
they seem to have some kind of strange allergy to imagination, and I think that's unfortunate because you're missing out on a lot of great things. The idea that you can only write serious fiction if you make it real, which is a completely misleading thing to say anyway, that realism is somehow more serious than genre fiction like fantasy or science fiction. That idea to me is ridiculous and kind of petty. So I completely disagree with that mentality, and I think that it's indicative of a stunted imagination and probably fear of not being taken seriously.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, for me, I'm just like I'll read pretty much anything because there's great works of like more mainstream fiction or literary fiction as they call it, and there's bad stuff in that, but also at the same time there's great and bad fantasy too. There's stuff that I enjoy and there's utter crap.
Yep. There's plenty of schlock out there too, but that's true of any genre. So,
but it's always kind of interested me why people like take someone like I don't know, Kurt Vonnegut, more seriously, and someone like Philip K. Dick, on another kind of. I know you're not much of like a, I know you're not as,
no, but it's a
like a
perfect
sci-fi
example.
reader, but I'm kind of that interests me more as much as it kind of annoys me.
It's a perfect example because there isn't
like
really
what
much
makes
difference.
like Vonnegut better is what I guess is sort of my interest.
Right. Yeah, why do we have Vonnegut in literary anthologies that I teach at my college and we don't have Philip K. Dick? When really they're similar, and same thing with, there are certain fantasy authors who do make it into literary anthologies like Ursula K or even Neil Gaiman.
Right, Bradbury.
They're just literary enough to be considered serious.
So to be fair, Ray Bradbury always was like, I write in the fantastical, or in the.
Yes, yeah.
I remember
Neil Gaiman embraces the fantasy label, so
yeah, that's why.
So did Le Guin, by the way. So yeah.
Yeah, that's why I mean, I still would like to read Salman Rushdie, but I like that people like Gaiman are totally willing to say I am a fantasy author, and I'm not ashamed of that.
No, I personally agree with that stance a lot more. I think I understand why people like Rushdie take the position they do, though, because they have this desire to be taken seriously, but I think it's more unfortunate than anything else. So
yeah, no, it's I don't know. It's just it's just a funny thing. Like why do we read? I mean, I love Ray Bradbury. He's like top 3 author for me. I don't know if you've read Bradbury, but
yeah.
amazing author for sure. But it's like why do people take Fahrenheit 451, which is a good book. I'm not trying to like diss on it by any means. I wasn't trying to diss on Kurt Vonnegut either. By the way, I like Vonnegut stuff, but
same here.
It's just an interest for me. Like, and I don't know. I thought maybe you'd have thoughts since you're a professor, you're in academia, and you also cover fantasy on your channel. So I thought that would be something to talk. I don't know if you've talked about it before, maybe, but.
Oh yeah, I've talked about this lots, but I don't mind talking about it because it's something I'm passionate about. It is true that certain works within a genre do lend themselves to more exploration, let's say, than others. I mentioned how Neil Gaiman is American Gods is a text that I taught in my fantasy novels course several years, and it works great in a classroom setting because there are a lot of themes woven into that book, and you can explore, you can get something out of it with every reread.
How we relate to myths and
how we relate to myths. It's a lot about identity, a lot about how culture is formed. It's just it's a very rich text in terms of the layers of themes in there. Now,
perhaps
if you look
I'll have you on, we can discuss American Gods at some point. If
Yeah. No, I'd love to.
I did a review of it like a while back, and it was really terrible. So I'd like to do it again at some point.
I do have my one review of it, and I was in a discussion with Abby Salter once about American Gods as well. So that was a more in-depth discussion. But yeah, it's definitely a great text, and it teaches well. Whereas if you compare that to Game of Thrones, it's a book that I love, and it's beautifully written in many respects. But George R. R. Martin is writing more entertaining storytelling than thematic storytelling. There are themes, don't get me wrong, there are themes in there.
I was about to say, there are themes in that,
Absolutely, there are themes in that. But it's not a theme-driven story the way American Gods is. And so it's not as you can't get into the same kind of deep analysis that you do with American Gods. It works okay. People get excited about certain parts, but after that excitement, it's like, okay, what else is there to talk about? And it doesn't teach as well as American Gods does.
Okay. I do have some thoughts, but
try it sometime.
I mean, I do think there are some interesting things in Game of Thrones to talk
about.
Oh,
for sure,
like,
it is interesting.
Like legacy and consequences and
vengeance,
how you'll be remembered,
politics.
But I've thought of Game of Thrones is another one I'd like to reread at some point, see if it still holds up, because
I've read it probably 5 or 6 times.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they're good. I enjoy them. But yeah, no, I get what you mean. American Gods is just a beast on its own. I remember I read it for the first time. I was a senior in high school, and I was just blown away by it. Again, that was another one that really is like, fantasy literature can be this,
it's really cool. It's a wonderful genre. So much to talk about, and I've really enjoyed discussing it with you, Britton.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciated this conversation, and we should do it again at some point.
Absolutely, yeah, and best wishes with your writing, and best wishes with your channel.
I think it's gonna storm, but yeah, no. Again, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're probably busy, or I don't know. It's summertime, so and
Oh, I stay out of trouble year round. So yeah.
If you want to share stuff, go right ahead. I like to ask people what they to share their social media before we
Oh,
leave.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, the YouTube channel is Philip Chase, and I'm on Twitter, Philip Chase 90, and that's about it. I don't play around on social media too much. So, yeah, that's all I can handle is YouTube and Twitter. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Again, we should do this again at some point.
Awesome. Thank you, Britton.
Maybe-
Take care now.
Maybe we could do an American Gods discussion. That would be fun.
That would be awesome.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. All right. See you guys later.